was in high school, I played on a travel baseball team in the summers. We'd have tournaments all over the country, where we'd sometimes play up to 6 or 7 games in the span of 2 days. This particular tournament was being hosted in South Carolina, so we took a team bus down there for the weekend. Everyone on the team got along really well, since most of us have been playing together since middle school. 2 of my teammates worth noting are Corey and Liam. They weren't the smartest guys, but they were pretty big troublemakers. It wasn't uncommon for them to get in trouble with the coaches for doing stupid pranks. They were generally liked by the team, but I was always on edge being around them. Once we arrived and checked into the hotel, everyone was pretty exhausted, and we had an 8 a.m. game the next morning. We all hung out in the pool area, which was surprisingly really nice for a hotel. It had a water slide, along with both an indoor and outdoor pool, with plenty of chairs and space to hang out. Once it was 10 p.m., one of the hotel staff members told us that the pool was closing, so we got all of our stuff together to head up to our rooms. On the way up, Corey and Liam decided it would be a great idea to ding-dong ditch one of the people staying on our floor. Myself, along with a small minority of the group, were sensible enough to tell them no, but there was no stopping them. As we all walked in a group down the hall, Corey and Liam ran up to a door and began violently pounding on it several times, before they started running down the hall, where we obviously followed, not wanting to take the blame for their stupid prank. At the end of the hall, we ducked into the stairwell and peered out to see if someone came to the door. Seconds later, a man in his mid to late 40s stepped outside, and with all of our heads sticking around the corner, he clearly saw us. Instead of just giving us a well-deserved scolding, he began charging at us down the hall. We booked it down the floor, where we ran across the hall all the way to the other end, and slowly began taking the other staircase up, with hopes that we could sneak back onto the floor and get into our rooms without him seeing. Fortunately, we did, but I was still upset at the fact that we already made an enemy on the first night there, who just so happened to be staying on the same floor as us. I went to bed that night without any further issue, and got up early the next morning for the game. We were playing a triple header, and our last game was at 7 p.m., so we'd be getting back to the hotel pretty late. Once that time came, none of us were ready to go to bed yet, so we stayed in the main lobby area and hung out for a while. Everything was going fine, until Liam suggested that we should sneak into the pool, which had been closed since 10 p.m. I definitely wasn't going swimming, so I didn't say a single word as they discussed it to each other. The outcome was what I had expected, and they all agreed to go, as they stood up from the table and began heading over. I followed behind them, even though I knew it was only going to cause trouble. Once we got to the outdoor area by the pool, we were almost immediately yelled at and asked to leave by the staff. So, like the night before, we made our way up to the 3rd floor to get to our rooms. This was around the time that things started to take a bad turn. As we walked down the hallway, everyone was muttering to Corey and Liam not to do it, but despite our efforts, they pounded on the same man's door, this time kicking it really hard. Corey and Liam took off, but the rest of us were ready to tell him that it wasn't us when he came out. However, the man was carrying a pair of scissors this time, which we immediately took notice of. He screamed at us to stop, but we continued walking at a casual pace, trying to ignore him to prevent anything from escalating. We eventually made the turn down to the staircase, where Corey and Liam were sitting there, crying out of laughter. Much more serious this time, we told them to stop, explaining that the guy had scissors in his hand when he came to the door. It pretty much had the opposite effect on them, and before we even knew it, they were sprinting down the hallway again to bang on his door. I watched in painful suspense, knowing that this guy was about ready to lose it on them. As soon as they started banging on the door, it swung wide open, and the man came out, immediately tackling Liam to the ground and into the wall. Corey took off running, and Liam managed to slip out from underneath him and run away, but this guy was manic. He kept screaming that he was going to kill them as he started chasing them down the hall. We watched until he was out of sight after turning down the opposite side staircase, so we tried to run down a couple flights and check the halls to see if we could find them. We checked each floor until we reached the main level, which meant that they were either in the staircase or on this level. It didn't take long before Corey and Liam came around the corner on the other end, where they booked it to the pool area. We watched through the windows in the workout room as they ran out there, with the man following them out shortly after too. Corey and Liam stayed on the opposite side of the pool, which made it extremely difficult for the guy to catch them. All of my teammates were laughing, but I knew this was getting very serious. It was all happening so fast, and I definitely didn't want to involve myself in the situation. Suddenly, Liam slipped by the edge of the pool, landing on his knees, which allowed the guide to catch up to him. As soon as Liam saw that, he jumped into the pool to swim away from him. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it looked like Corey and Liam were trying to calm the guy down, but it was only making matters worse. Corey finally stopped running and let the man approach, who was still carrying the scissors in his hand. It looked like Corey was trying to defuse the situation, but it was too late. The guy grabbed Corey by the neck and slammed him onto the concrete, where he began stabbing him in the stomach with the scissors. We were all completely silent, and there was nothing we could do but watch. Almost instantaneously, Liam got out of the pool and attacked the man on top of Corey. Once Liam got the guy off Corey, he sprinted into the lobby and screamed to call 911. While we were all huddled around the front desk, the guy with the scissors came back, but the clerk was able to talk him out of it, informing him that the police were on their way. Once that was finally taken care of, everyone turned their attention back on Corey, who was barely conscious now. We tried to put pressure over the stab wounds to stop the bleeding, but he didn't have much time. Most of us were crying, and the entire situation was quite literally a living nightmare. The paramedics and the police finally showed up and immediately arrested the man who attacked Corey. We were all kicked out and banned from the hotel, including all of our coaches and parents that came along. Our coach decided to withdraw the team from the tournament, and we all headed home, except for Corey. The first few days after returning home were very weird. Nobody on the team talked to each other, including the parents. It wasn't until a few weeks after the incident occurred that we finally got a long group text from our coach about Corey. He said that Corey was still in the hospital, but the doctors were confident that he'd make a full recovery. Later on, I also learned about the backstory of the man that stabbed Corey. His wife had just divorced him and kicked him out of the house, so he had been temporarily living in that hotel. Any of us could have fallen victim to him, especially since we were all in a group. It just goes to show how dangerous doing stupid pranks can be, and you never know who's ready to snap. My wife and I rarely get to spend time together, as our work schedules are pretty hectic. Last summer, we each decided to set aside a week to take a vacation. We hadn't been on one since our honeymoon, so I was pretty excited for the trip. We set our eyes on Florida and booked a hotel just outside of Fort Lauderdale. The reviews that I read online were pretty decent, but I wish I would have looked further. We arrived at the hotel on a Saturday night, after Ubering from the airport. Upon pulling in, we noticed that several of the parking lot lights were out, almost making the lot pitch black. We grabbed our bags and headed towards the sliding doors at the front entrance, only to run straight into it. For some reason, they didn't open when we tried to step in, so I started knocking on the door, annoyed that we were already running into problems. Minutes passed, until the front desk worker finally came to the door and manually opened it up. It was a younger man in his 20s, who was extremely apologetic and explained that they were having electrical problems in the building that night. My wife and I told him it was okay, and he led us to the front desk to check us in. This was around the time that I really started to get annoyed. The computer that the kid was using kept powering on and off, making for a painfully long and slow check-in. Once he finally got the computer to work, he checked us in and gave us the key cards to our room. We were on the 7th floor, so we dragged our luggage to the elevator, and of course, that wasn't working either, so we had to take the stairs. By this point, I was in a really bad mood, but by the time we reached the 7th floor, I was too tired to be mad. I was ready for bed. Our room was thankfully fine, and it looked clean and well maintained. We both slept that night without any issues, and I felt a lot better the next day. We packed up for a day at the beach in the morning, and once we left our room, we were happy to see that the elevator seemed to be working again. The beach was great, except for the terrible sunburn my wife and I got. Once we finished at the beach, we made our way over to a little spot with a couple restaurants for dinner. Since it was cooling down, we decided to go for a walk along the beach before Ubering back to the hotel. By the time we got back, it was already dark, and the parking lot lights were once again not working. The door opened on its own, which was a good sign, but once again, the elevator wasn't working. We fell asleep shortly after getting in our room until I was awakened in the middle of the night by a weird noise. It sounded like someone was moving furniture around in the room next to us, but it wouldn't stop. I looked over my shoulder to see that my wife was fumbling around with the phone on the nightstand, to which I quickly realized wasn't working. I asked her if we should go downstairs to the desk, but she shrugged her shoulders, clearly not wanting to walk down 7 flights of stairs in the middle of the night. I waited for a couple minutes to see if the sound would stop, but it never did. I decided to go over to the room and politely ask the person to try to keep it down, which I hoped would be an easy fix. That turned out to be a major misjudgment. As soon as I knocked on the door, the sound stopped, and I waited for the person to come answer. I'm honestly not sure how long I stood there, but I ended up walking back into the room when no one came to the door. My wife and I waited for any further noises coming from the room, but it was silent, so we were content. We passed out again shortly after, but what happened next still feels like some sort of weird dream to me. I woke up again to the same noise, but this time, it sounded like it was right in front of me. I rubbed my eyes and looked around the room, but I couldn't see anything. That's when I noticed that someone was crouched down at the foot of our bed. I snapped my head to the side, only to see that my wife was still sound asleep. I have no idea what I said, but I screamed, and the figure shot up in front of me, immediately pointing a gun at my head. In a low, deep voice, the man said, "Be quiet. Do not make a noise." I nodded my head in compliance, as my wife woke up and inched closer to me in bed. The feeling of helplessness I felt in that situation was so overwhelming that I still feel it today. We each had no idea who he was, what he was doing there, and how he even got in there. He dropped back down to the floor and began rummaging around under our bed until he pulled out at least 2 objects. One was a small black bag, and the other one looked like a small Ziploc bag, but I couldn't see its contents. Just then, the bathroom door swung open, and another person dressed in all black emerged in the room. They also had a bag in their hand, but I couldn't see anything else. Just as quietly as they must have entered, they each walked straight out of the door, quietly shutting it behind them. My wife and I were in total shock and disbelief, and after gathering ourselves, she called the police from her cell phone. We waited for them to come, as I anxiously paced around the room, looking for anything missing. Oddly enough, all of our bags we had brought were still there, and our stuff was seemingly left untouched. The police eventually arrived and knocked on our door, to which my wife and I stepped out to talk with them. We explained everything that had just happened, and the officers seemed just as perplexed as us. None of it made sense, but that started to change when one of the officers asked me which room was originally making the noise. I pointed over to the room beside ours, and they knocked on the door a few times, repeatedly saying, "Police, open up." No one came to the door, and as a last resort, the officer tried the door handle, which opened right up. They searched the entire room, only to find it completely ransacked. No one was there, but I guess that explained all the noise we had heard earlier that night. The officer stepped out, and without saying anything, they tried our door handle, and to our disbelief, it opened right up. My jaw dropped, realizing that our door opened without the key card, which explained how the people got into our room, realizing that I forgot to lock the main lock of the door. We were given a full refund for our stay, and we checked into another hotel that same night, once we were done with the police. The small amount of information the police were able to gather in this case only made it more disturbing. It was discovered that the people who broke in had just checked out of the same room we were in, just hours before we arrived. They somehow managed to check in a room under a fake name for one night, which is when the electrical problems started to occur. It was clear that they were looking for something that they left in our room, and must have gone in the wrong room when they came back to the hotel, which explains why they were in the room next to us first. Now, as to what it was they were looking for, I have no idea. It seemed like they took multiple things, which makes it even more bizarre. It couldn't have been anything good, otherwise they would have just asked the front desk to check for them. The security cameras were glitched out from the constant electrical outages in the building, so they weren't able to garner any additional information from that night. They were able to catch a blurry photo of them from the security footage of them entering, after being dropped off in an unmarked car. I'm not sure if the electricity problems were linked to them or not, but it just seemed awfully convenient for them to not work on the night they decided to break in. This was one of the most bizarre and alarming incidents I've ever lived through, and my wife and I still have so many unanswered questions. This happened in the summer, and I believe I was about 12 at the time. I was staying in a hotel in a fairly large city with my mom and my younger brother. We were visiting our extended family, but we chose not to stay in their house. My brother is younger than me by a decent amount, so I was usually responsible for keeping an eye on him. On the day we arrived, my mom put me in charge of my brother while she checked us in and received our room card. My brother and I sat down on a couch in the lobby while he played on his DS. While we were sitting, a man in his mid-40s walked into the hotel. The couch was facing the hotel doors, so I was able to get a pretty good look at him. I remember that he was very average looking, wearing a plain white t-shirt and gray jeans. As he approached the couches in the lobby, he gave me a light smile, then sat down on the couch directly opposite of ours. I didn't think anything of it at first, until I realized that he didn't go up to the counter first. He just came in and sat down. It made me feel a little uncomfortable, as I started to wonder if he followed us in. Thankfully, before I could even continue in my nervous thoughts, my mom called us over and told us that our room was ready, so we left the lobby and went up to our room. Shortly after settling in, we left the hotel to go meet with our family. We ended up staying there for most of the day, so the thought of the guy from earlier had completely slipped my mind by this point. We returned to the hotel around 7, and my mom told us that we could go swimming in the hotel pool if we wanted to as we walked past it. So, we all went to our room, changed, then went to the pool. Within only a few minutes after we got in the water, the same man from earlier walked in and sat down. This time, he was wearing the same jeans but had a sweater on, and he definitely wasn't going swimming. Again, I didn't think much of it until I noticed that my mom was starting to look visibly worried. She pointed the guy out to me, and she said that if he didn't leave within the next 5 minutes, we needed to get out and go back to our room. Well, 5 minutes passed, and he was still there, so we got our things together and left. By then, it was close to 8 p.m., and my brother and I were starting to get tired. Before leaving for the trip, my mom had rented some movies to watch, so we planned to watch one of them before bed. Even after a while, I noticed that my mom was still a little on edge because of the man from earlier, which made me a little bit more worried too. Halfway through the movie, my mom got up to take a shower, since my brother and I still had to before bed. While she was in there, someone knocked on the door and said, "Housekeeping," in a high-pitched voice. I thought it was weird that the cleaning staff would come this late, but I needed another towel, so I answered the door. I wish I hadn't been so stupid. It was the same creepy man. He gave me a smile and a little wave, and I just stood there, kind of motionless. My mind automatically went to the worst possible situations, and I started to panic. Suddenly, I heard the water in the shower turn off, followed by my mom asking me who was at the door. I was speechless, and I couldn't form a proper sentence. The man continued staring at me and made a creepy grin as he watched me clearly start to panic. Suddenly, he spoke. "How was your swim?" At that moment, my mom came out of the bathroom, pulled me away from him, then slammed the door and locked it. After asking us if we were okay, she called the front desk from our hotel phone to report the guy. I told her to just call the police, but she didn't listen, so the guy was able to walk out of the hotel without any issue. After that, we called our extended family, and they let us stay at their house for the rest of the trip. To this day, I still don't know what that man's intentions were, and it still freaks me out just thinking about it. I'm just glad that my mom heard everything from the shower, because I truly believe something terrible would have happened if she wasn't there in time.